so I wanted to just wave this at all of you. This is a couple of years old by now, but it stands as a reminder that this coming fall, we will be holding the next iteration of our Arte Latinx exhibition. It's going to be hosted at the Museo Latino down in South O. We're going to bring in some speakers from across the country, including Rose Salceda, an art historian from Stanford, and Lalo Alcaraz, who is a political cartoonist, illustrator, who's coming to us from California. You might have seen his work. I don't know, like, if any of you watched the Super Bowl, the part of the Super Bowl beyond Bad Bunny that you might have noticed was that everybody was given little towels. Those were designed by Lalo Alcaraz. And so we're catching him in kind of a hot moment where he was just, seen by a billion eyes at once. But if any of you are artists or know artists in the Great Plains region who are interested in participating, please keep your eyes open. The call will be made public at the beginning of May. And so in just a few short weeks, we'll be live again. So please do participate. I think that's all the official business I have to do, right? Sorry, looking back at you and you, of course, is in control of my brain. So now, allow me to introduce Veronica to all of you, who I had the great pleasure of meeting in 2022 in Houston. We happen to both be attending an NEH seminar on Latinx art hosted by the University of Houston, which is her home institution. It was one of the more formative experiences I've had in my career, and it was a beautiful reminder to us all that Latinx art is one of the most powerful currents in contemporary art the world over. It's been blooming and blossoming left and right, and so please think of this as part of a much larger international ecosystem that is being built in real time that you are now a part of. So thanks for being here all alone. That means things. So Veronica's from Brownsville, Texas, living in Houston, Texas now, and her work focuses on what I would broadly call kind of like the borderlands experience and the sort of hybrid intermediary spaces that exist around the U.S.-Mexico border, and she plays with many of the kind of cultural signifiers of American Latinidad. You'll see some of this in the presentation. The ones that I think that have leapt out at me first is that there's I hope this is the right way to put this, there's a kind of recurring engagement with the Ford F-150 pickup as a vehicle, both as a tool and as a cultural signifier. And so you'll see both the truck in whole and in part appear throughout the work, but there's a lot of really beautiful kinds of questionings about issues of labor and migration, citizenship, identity construction, particularly in that very kind of volatile middle space that exists around the borderland. Veronica has an MFA in studio art and photography and digital media from the University of Houston. She's been at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine, and she's actually here in Omaha right now as a resident at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art downtown. So once again, thanks to the Bemis Center for being part of our world. Thanks to the Bemis residents for coming. Everybody, please, if you haven't yet been down to the Bemis Center, do go. It is ongoingly the world's #1 ranked artist residency program. It is a true gem that we have downtown in the old market that I think we might forget about periodically because it's local to us. But it is a world-renowned program that brings in international artists on a rotating cycle to keep our world quite active and exciting. So this is very much a kind of friends and family endeavor, and I really want to stress that because it's through these networks of connections with other artists and scholars and institutions that places like OLLAS succeeds. And so these collaborative energies are really important for us to nurture because without them, things like this, they may not exist, quite frankly. I have talked too long. I'm going to get out of the way because I'm the second least interested person. This sheet is very magnificent. Speaker, please help me welcome Veronica Gaona to our
Hi everyone. really going to focus on some of the formal aspects of my artistic practice or creative practice. The resourcefulness that I tend to practice too, perseverance, and sort of how I've been developing my work over the years in different residencies, and just showing you just how the works have evolved over time and in these different places. My background is in mass communication. I studied mass communication with a focus in print journalism, and then quickly after, I got a job and working as a marketing specialist for a social justice group called La Unión del Pueblo Entero in South Texas, and we worked with the community there in South Texas to really encourage them to advocate for their own rights, or to encourage them to go to their local offices and ask for basic infrastructure or services that usually these communities in South Texas need. So I worked there for like 2 months as a photographer and through this marketing specialist position. And then quickly after that, I went to the University of Houston to pursue my master's in fine arts in photography and digital media, and the program was very broad. It was my first exposure to photography, art, and contemporary art. So through that program, I made some of my first projects that were photo and video based, and then quickly after that, I was exposed to conceptual art, contemporary art, and I immediately started to go inward and reflect about what was going on around me, specifically in South Texas. And then I started making work that was not photo-based. It was installation, performance, and sculpture, and I was able to make work that looked like this. This is dragged, a presentation that I made for my thesis exhibition at the University of Houston at the Bradford Art Museum for my thesis work in 2020. It's not photo-based, but I was very informed about the realities faced by the community in South Texas during that time. The migrant protection protocols were executed by the federal government, and from 2019 to 2021, people were just waiting for a few years in the border crossing between Matamoros and Rondo. And at the same time, I was moving back and forth between both countries and then going to Houston to study. And that just, encouraged me to think about photography in other ways, to challenge people to look at photography more critically, because at that time, a lot of photos of asylum seekers were on the television, on the digital media, and I just felt like the audience or the public was very desensitized to that, and we're not really responding to those injustices. So I wanted to make work that would involve the public and would involve them in a relational way with those stories from the border. So in this piece, I made this piece with Fabriano paper. Fabriano paper is like a watercolor paper, and I soaked this paper into like the human residue of the Rio Grande water. So this Rio Grande water river, this is where a lot of the asylum seekers were living for a few years. They would wash their clothes, they would swim, they would just live their lives there. And so I started to think about the material as the material residue or presence of the people that were living there for a few years. So I started to talk about those stories, experiences with the material. And I soaked the paper many times in these trays until I had like a tint that I wanted. Sometimes they were dark, other times they were light, because I wanted to create this sort of like not painterly, but sort of like this landscape, riverscape landscape of the area. At the same time, I continued making work about the migrant protection protocols, but then started to just continue to make work in other ways. I was interested in suspending the water in the space so people could walk through the space and make them sort of imagine, these people's lives and sort of the ambivalence that the asylum seekers experience during those periods. And I wanted it to be sort of serious and sort of serious and the direct light hitting the humidifiers. And there's also like references to Teresa Magoya's work, which is a huge influence in my preliminary work when I was studying at UH. I made some newspapers. The newspapers had these Google photographs that I gathered from Google, and then I modified or edited the photographs that I gathered from the internet of the South Texas and the asylum seekers during that time. And this is a newspaper called Wait, Hope, but in Spanish it's called Espera, Esperanza. So it's like, there's like this, I'm playing on the words. Like, there's people waited for a long time, but they were really hopeful to just get the asylum. At the same time, I was started to reflect on my own experience. And in grad school, this series of works, The Houses and Us, was made for my thesis exhibition at the Blackbird Art Museum. Here, I reflect on how migration and labor has a real material transformative impact to the building processes. During this time, I was exposed to this book called The Remittance Landscape, a book by Sarah Lynn Lopez, who is an architectural historian at UT Austin. And in her book, she really pivoted my practice, and I was able to understand what I was doing or what I wanted to pursue for the rest of my career or refine. And because she just sort of like laid it out really to me, and she like had different terms, and that was really easy for me to understand. In her book, The Remittance Landscape, she refers to places as houses, public buildings, infrastructure, and material ephemera. Remittance space are the intangible aspects of long-distance buildings, which are loss, nostalgia, absence, death, and social rituals. So those two terms were huge in how I was thinking about, and how I was thinking about like the urban material, but also the industrial construction material that you're gonna see in some of the works that I end up doing here at BEMI. These are some of the close-ups of the photos here I was sort of like researching my family's decision to live and work in the north, and how their building aspirations in the homeland were about sort of using the money gained from the U.S. American dollars and then sending that money back to Mexico to build the American dream house, or like the dream house. So the dream house that we have in Mexico is constructed with cement blocks, and so I wanted to photograph myself between these walls, between these cement blocks, and these funerary flowers that we would just be around very frequently. We would not just build homes in Mexico, but we would also visit loved ones at cemeteries and leave flowers. So that was very significant because it solidifies like a place of understanding of who I was. And these were double exposure cameras with a digital camera. And here, for this photo, I was interested in capturing like the cement blocks, but also these more, these bricks. So the brick that you see here, this was the first house, like the more adobe looking house. And then like the more contemporary house is made out of brick, out of cement blocks. And that was me practicing my photography skills. I believe this was 2021 or 2020, I can't remember. And then soon after that, I quickly made works that talked about all these experiences within the remittance landscape. And remittances, for those who don't know what remittances are financial flows that are transferred from the U.S. to any other country abroad. It can be Mexico, it can be India, it can be China. And then how family members use that money to build a whole life abroad. So just learning about how people transfer money to invest in other places was just so fascinating. I was just so fascinated about that because it sort of like resisted this, it resisted the capital of the U.S. and it sort of resisted power too. It resisted like the sense of power within the U.S. as it relates to the economy of it. Here, for those who did not return in life, there's always death. This is a Ford F-150 pickup truck tinted window glass, and I just laid it in the floor with this decal. Here I was thinking about remittances beyond financial flows, or like social rituals, like the transferring of loved ones or bodies back to their homeland once they have passed away. I was interested in thinking about it in a more expansive way, like what do we do daily to connect who we are to people that we love or connect with. And this is a commemorative text that has a lot of layers to it. It's not just text, it's also points to subcultures. I was thinking about the historic lowrider culture and that existed back then in the 1940s and 1950s, but also the contemporary riding culture of the troqueando culture with the trucks that are low to the ground, and just thinking about all these layered histories and shared histories and experiences that communities share in different places. here, this is a presentation I made in San Antonio, Texas. It's this same sculptural piece, but I was I wanted to present this piece with the humidifiers in the back, because I wanted it to have this sculptural essence to it, but I also wanted it to be ephemeral and sort of impermanent, because there's like this impermanence about moving across different places and working. And then later, I started to just continue working on those same ideas. This same piece, for those who did not return in life, I eventually took the same project or work and continued the work as a series with the same name, but instead of doing a sculpture work, I did a performance with a few of my friends, and I also involved the community with this work. So this is a vehicular burnout. I wanted to put in motion my sculptural piece, this piece, with the title, the name, but also the way I would place the decal in front of the windshield mirror. And here I was just thinking about work, labor, the return to home. I wanted to imagine like the presence and absence of loved ones with the burnout. I wanted it to be sort of ghostly and yeah, like ghostly and sort of funerary and commemorative. So for me, it was just, the live action was important, but also the photographs were particularly important, because the photo performance it's almost like a trace or a residue left behind that doesn't exist anymore, because the live action has passed. So I was interested in how I can use the photo performance as a material for this experience. And this performance was a homage to an uncle that had passed away. He worked for many years in the U.S. and unfortunately he just returned back to Mexico when he had passed away. If you look closely here, you see the same sculpture piece, but the decal is here. In 2022, I continued this project, but I wanted to involve the public and work with a few art institutions in Houston. One of them was Lawndale Art Center, just connect with each other. There was music, food, but I also thought about this gathering as a way to look over the truck, or to transform that space as a vigil and just like wait and connect, because vigils are usually these quiet times for people to gather in hard times. So here, this is Lawndale Art Center. And what I was doing here, I forgot to say, we were putting flowers in the truck bed. So part of this performance was that I wanted to add flowers. I hadn't done it in the first burnout. I wanted to use flowers in the performance in the truck bed. So we were arranging that flower arrangement. And this was a vehicular burnout in the Lawndale parking space. I worked with a friend of mine who knows how to burn tire. So he was burning tire, and I wasn't burning. I was more like the director. I was like, this is my idea. Help me execute it. And he was like, I got you. He did the burnout. We took photographs of the burnout. And it was just really important to conduct a huge cloud of smoke and leave marks behind the space. These are some of the public members, some of the community members looking at the marks. And then at the end of this live events, community gathering, in a museum space, I present these photo performance prints in this way. This is the way I present it in a gallery space. These are small, intimate photos in a 16 by 19 frame. And these are some of the prints that I got from that. This time around, I used a black truck. I also told my professional burnout car friend to dress a certain way. He had a Mexican soccer away shirt. He had a Mexican belt that is sort of studded. He had baggy pants and boots. It's not very apparent, but it's just like I wanted that to be part of it. I was interested in how the away and home relationship. Very, very hip. These are some of the marks left behind. These are some of the funerary flowers, the flower arrangement, and the back of the bed of the truck. And just continuing to think about the truck as material. At the time, during this time, I had my uncle's truck, and I was riding his truck in Houston, and I had parked in a neighborhood, and when I got back to the vehicle, the window was shattered, and I thought about a way to recycle the material or to keep the material, because the truck is very precious to me. So I thought about how I could elevate it as maybe as a jewel, or how can I take care of it after it had been broken too. So I started making these pieces out of just resourcefulness. I really just didn't have a lot of money, so I thought about just making some works with what I had. And this is one of my favorite pieces, because it just allowed me to just be creative without having much. And just being in residencies allows you to think about creative ways to gather the material that's around you to make the work that you need. Right after grad school, that was my main goal. How could I keep making work without having a stable job? This was some of the work that I also made at Diverse Works. Oh no, at Lawndale Art Center. at Longdale Art Center. This was part of my residency there. At the end of the residency, we had a group show and solo show. So this was the presentation I made. I gathered the rubber dust from the burnout and also just collected rubber dust from other places, glass dust, and made this installation on the wall. And I was thinking about just other ways of presenting the work, other ways of expanding the work beyond the presentation or the photographs. It's like just I think it's, for me, it's more like an exercise. How can I push it further? I usually, when I think about a project, I never end it. I try to expand it as much as I can, expand it until it's like completely like done. And then I feel like, okay, I finalized that project. This is a project I made at the Bemis Art Center here in Omaha. This art center is open to the public. They have many public events, so if you're interested in just exposing yourself to art and contemporary art, it is a great way to do it. They have rotating exhibitions throughout the year. I've been a resident there since January and April, so my residency concludes soon, but I've been able to make work and just expand the work. This has been a very humbling experience because it allowed me a lot of time and space, a lot of space to make installations and presentations that are hard to do in some spaces. So I really just thought, there's really no limit because the installations are huge. So I just thought, how could I expand the work that I have into installation presentation? So I decided I went back and thought, how could I do it? So I thought about the bed liners. And I fragmented the bed liners and melted wax and incorporated flowers with it. Here I begin sort of my involvement with the actual material of the truck, because there's been a huge involvement with the truck, with how it moves, with the traces that it leaves behind. I began to sort of think about how I could use the metal and make these wall-mounted sculptures that are photographic. And so I begin this long series of works with this piece called To Know and to Dream at the Same Time, to sort of just know all the challenges that communities would face, and to know at the same, and to know sort of like, to know, but to also dream, like to dream about just having a better life and things like that. So that was the title. And I collaged these salvaged metal pieces with aluminum sheets, steel sheets and photographs, vinyl. Here you see a vinyl piece. I'm interested in vinyls and symbols, decals. These are some of the photographs that I scan, and then I print on aluminum sheet or steel. Here I begin to fragment it more. I suspend photographs in the wall in relationship with pieces on the floor. I continue to think about the floor as a very important place in my practice. And here I also just begin to think about the long history about of just like the lowrider culture from the 1940s, 1950s, and the emerging subculture of Roqueando, and how people modify cars and ride them low to the ground. Combine both the flat surfaces of the trucks. It can be a Ford F-150, GMC, Chevrolets, Rams. Here at Bentley's, I began to work with different truck brands because at the beginning I only worked with Ford F-150, but now I'm starting to work with different brands just because it can be more layered, right? It can be more involved. So I've started to use different brands. Different characteristics of the metal have been really fascinating for me to work with. I'm interested in how crumpled up the metal is in relationship with how flat some of the pieces could be. While I made this sculpture work, I tried to continue these characteristics about my practice. Some of the earlier works that you saw are impermanent, or there's this precarity to it. So here I wanted to just sort of continue that characteristic by using this tarp-like material. Here you see the grommets, the rope, and sort of how it's attached but not completely attached. This one's detached. And a lot of the photographs have scratches. They're not perfectly scanned photos. I was just interested in combining the photographs with the metal and sort of have them blend better. This is some of the most recent work that I've made at Bentley's. This one and this one too. These are photographs on tarp, which is a new material that I'm working with. This tarp-like material relates to the tarp that we usually put on the back of a pickup truck. So I thought it's just part of that language within the truck. Here is another piece. This piece has these screws screwed through it, and then there are these photographs collaged with it as well. I also use welding techniques, precise cutting the parts to the size that I want it. At the end, sometimes I weld the pieces together or use these industrial rivets. They're like screws, but they're cleaner. They look better on the surface. So here you can see how I weld the piece together, and then add the photos. Here I begin to think about the architectural aspect within these financial flows and social practices within communities. Here I think about remittance place and the architectural aspect. Remittances across international lines alleviate distance and act as a lifeline for families left behind in their homelands. These architectural plays speak to this connection, hinting at structures built with remittances homes typically constructed from cement or makeshift planters. This sort of structure you see a lot in Mexico and Latin America. There's other types of facades in other places in the world. You know, there's a hybrid of facades in Asia or in Europe, because they have their own cultural way of building homes, so their facades are completely different. This phenomenon happens across the globe, but in Mexico and Latin America, it usually looks like this. There's always this exposed rebar and then cement blocks. Much of my work reflects the temporary nature of these contributions. So I'm really interested in how there's a temporariness to it, and how it might not last, or how people might not use the space because they're not there. I also think I critique this displacement that happens because of economic flows and people moving. Remittances, while it also builds worlds, it also displaces people. It's like, and the government knows that the more money that people send, the more displaced they are, because the more they have to leave to the north or leave to another country to work. So a lot of the work is like a critique to capitalism and the economy. These were some of the earlier works. Here, again, I was trying to be as resourceful as possible, so I made a simple column. And then I also, well, actually, this was my first piece that evoked the architectural space. It's a rebar, and then I made this piece. But this is a rebar with a series of caps, with studded caps and tinted opaque glass. And I made this piece because at the time I didn't have enough space or enough money to make work that was architectural or noticeable. So I wanted it to be simple but still evoke the sense of building or space. And so I used the rebar, and then I attached a series of caps that are adorned with like shattered glass. And then this project evolved to this presentation with the same name. Now it has evolved to a series. This work can exist in clusters of 1, 2, 3 rebars, depending on the presentation space. This was at El Museo del Barrio in New York, which was my first show in New York, which was huge for me. I'm very happy that happened. This was in 2024. And each cap took me a long time to produce. I worked with my students to make this work. At the time, they were looking for internships or opportunities for them to work or get involved with the arts. So some of my students worked with me on this project. Each cap took a long time, a lot of care and attention, because the glass shards are very tiny. So part of the ideas and concepts and emotive aspects of the work come because of the time and care that I took to elevate this glass as almost like a jewel, or this precious object that is usually discarded in the street. Here at Benny's, this is some of the work still in progress at the Benny's Art Center. Here I wanted to make more noticeable the homes or the architecture aspect of my practice. So I continue combining photos with buildings and metal. And yeah, it's an ongoing sort of reflection of just a lot of my ideas I began in grad school, and that I continue to sort of like practice and refine and learn from. Thank you.
Are you game for some Q&A? Does anybody
Any questions?
else want to start? Yeah.
I was wondering for your recent pieces you're working on, as well as the kind of metal assemblages. Where are you sourcing your photographs? Are these photographs that you've taken, or older ones of your family, or people you know? I was just
Thank you. So these photographs are gathered from my family album. I've spent a lot of time with my family album. I also just look at other family members' albums, and then once I have images that I think would work for the sculpture, I scan them on a Epson flatbed printer scanner. And then I do minor adjustments to the scan, very minor. I leave most of the scratches and dust on it. And once I have the scan, I print it on aluminum or steel.
How do you do that? Just the basic process of printing on aluminum and steel is serious.
So every time the process changes because of the resources or things like that. So I try to be very flexible, but most of the time I scan the photograph personally, and then I look for scanners, whether at school, because I teach part-time at school. So I use the scanners there at the art lab, or I go to commercial printing spaces and have them scan them and then print it. But most of the time it's me digging into the archive, laying the photographs out, seeing what sort of collage and what sort of clusters of photographs I want together to make this personal narrative about my experience with the salvage metal. And the process with combining the photographs with the metal is very playful at the end. At the beginning of the process is very physical, because I have to go to the junkyard, I have to clean the parts, wash them with degreasers and soap, and it's very labor intensive. It's very tiring too. Sometimes if I can afford it, I have people helping me. They become part of the process, and it makes it easier for me to work with the material, which I'm very grateful for. And then once the salvage metal is clean and ready, I cut it to whatever part or size that I want. I cut the pieces and weld it together with other salvage metal, and then I rivet the photos on the metal, because the photographs are not able to be welded, because it's like it has ink, and whenever you try to weld ink or paint, the weld doesn't connect because it has like electronic currents going. So the surface of the wall has to be clean. So it's usually just metal that I weld onto, and then I rivet the photos independently with rivets. Yes.
Is that where the truck parts are coming from? Like, do you get all the metal from the same place, or?
I get them from different places. So if I work in Houston, I gather places in Houston. Here in Omaha, I've gathered pieces in Omaha, specific junkyards or salvage places. They're usually junkyards, auto body shops, or recycling centers. But for me, over the years, I've started to think about how the work has evolved as I continue to move and go to residencies. How can I get that city involved with the work? Who's helping me? Like the people that I work with in the auto body shop, they sort of inform the work of how I sort of understand the city, you know, because I've worked in auto body shops for a few months now. I've learned that Omaha has a very diverse community. The community works hard, just like, you know, auto body shops and scrapyards across the city. So different cities, which has been exciting for me. And I think the cities inform the work too. Yes.
Where did you learn how to weld?
I first welded in Skowhegan. Yeah, I learned how to weld in Skowhegan. And, you know, Skowhegan was magical because I had 9 weeks of uninterrupted time. It was in the middle of the woods. The lake was there. But everyone had a studio. And during that time, a lot of artists had just plenty of time to work in the studios too. And my studio was right next to the shop, so I was always at the shop, welding, trying to learn how to weld, painting, spray painting the metal. Sometimes I leave the paint, other times I use spray paint, just because of the resourcefulness of it. I would love to eventually use powder coating and use like more hard industrial paint. But for now, spray paint works, I think. But yeah, I just know how to use the MIG welding, not the TIG, hopefully. Or the spot welding would be great.
Is there any specific reason that you put like the rolled glass on top?
For this piece, during that time, there were a few things happening. I was listening to a lot of corridos tumbados and just being part, seeing that subculture and seeing how the artists would dress, or going to burn out parking spaces and just seeing how people would dress with baggy pants, with a cap, a fitted cap. And some of my close collaborators during that time were musicians, and they were making music, and they would dress a certain way. And I happened to have some caps in my studio. No, I didn't have a studio. I was working from home. So I wanted to keep the works small, because I could work with the cap and glass and my kitchen table or stuff like that. And during that time, We collaborated on a few projects together at the Blackbird, at the Longdale Art Center. And at the same time, the truck that I have was broken into, the glass was shattered, so I wanted to pick it up from the street. And then that's when I sort of came to the conclusion that I would put the glass and the cap together. Because it was like a way to not spend money, use what I could find, but also how could I keep it small, but then like if I had a space or a residency lined up, how could I like prepare this project for a bigger presentation? So the caps existed as singular caps, and then they expanded to a sculptural piece with the space. It first began with this project. These were the first ones, and then I made the longer ones. So I was just thinking about the subcultures that I was involved with and that I'm still involved with. And the music that I was listening to, there's a sonic aspect about their work that I don't mention or talk about just because I don't know how to put it into words yet. I'm more interested in just the metal and the photographs right now and other aspects. But I know that's something behind in the background that might come. Yeah, it's an ongoing reflection.
Yes. Do you sell the hats for this, or is it just like an art piece that you?
So I've sold this piece. I sold this piece to a collector in LA. And this was actually the first piece that I sold. Which was very encouraging. Just coming from a family that moved to work and, and coming from a family that worked jobs that were grueling, or we didn't have a lot of resources. That was like, okay, I'm doing something good. Like they don't really understand the art, They're usually like, what are you doing? How are you gonna live off of it? So when I told them that I sold this piece, they were like, okay. They started to understand. But for me, that wasn't like it's not the goal. It sustains it, but for me, making smaller objects for people who support the work are great. We need big supporters. But for me, like the biggest the projects that fascinate me are projects like this that are harder for people to acquire. More in pieces that allow people to think about their social and cultural spaces, how they move around the world. So just continue making the work that you want, and find ways to make the work that you want, even though there's not a lot of opportunities out there. Try to find your own path by exposing yourself to people. Any other questions?
Can I just throw one last one in?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious, how much are you thinking about things like danger and risk? Because it seems like the work is both dangerous and risky by virtue of the process, but also the content too. Like, migration is a risky endeavor. The labor of construction, or even something as simple as like, what if your foot slips off the brake while you're doing burnouts?
Yes.
It does seem to invite a certain amount of tension from it.
Yeah, I think because of my earlier works, in grad school, I thought about, I really shifted my understanding about photo and how photograph or material could be embedded with meaning and experiences without really saying it, or in a figurative way, just sort of presenting it in a space and then having the public make up their own conclusions about it. So it was just really practicing how I could use material as the main subject of like the stories or the experiences, how the material has this embedded meaning with risk or violence or labor, you know, and how people use vehicles, or there's glass associated with violence or power, and just really leaning into the material as a way to express all the layered aspects of the experience, such as like violence or transformation and impermanence. So I let the material sort of shine, which is basically what I'm doing with the cats. I'm like letting them bedazzle and shine a little bit.
This might be that moment. Thank you all for coming. I know that lots of you might have class in 10 minutes somewhere else on this campus, so good luck getting there. Thank you.